Good morning, one and all. Today we are continuing History Lesson 1, the French Revolution. So now we continue with page number 16, the Reign of Terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is known as the Reign of Terror. Robespierre was the leader. So he followed a policy of severe control and punishment. All those whom he saw as being the enemies of the Republic, whether they are the ex-noblemen or the clergy, members of other political parties, even the members of his own party, who did not agree with his methods of dealing the way he wanted to run. So all of them were arrested and imprisoned and then tried by the Revolutionary Tribunal. So now, if the court, the Revolutionary Tribunal's court found them guilty, then they are guillotined. So what is guillotine? That is the one again. The question is, guillotine is an instrument. We have two poles out here, and then they have where they will put a net out here, a wooden thing, and then there will be an X like this, which they will drop from here. So this will chop off the neck of the person who had been sentenced to death. So that was how they are beheading the culprit. So this is guillotine, and this guillotine is named after Dr. Guillotin, who had invented this. So now, the Robespierre government issued laws placing maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grains to the cities and sell it at a fixed price that the government decides. The price of the thing that they are selling was decided by the government. The use of more expensive white flour was forbidden. All citizens were required to eat the plain legality, that is equality bread. A loaf of bread made of whole wheat, that is the bread made up of wheat. Equality was also sought to practice through the forms of speech and address, instead of the traditional monsieur, that is sir and madame. So all the French men and women were henceforth known as citoyen and citoyenne. Churches were shut down and their buildings were converted into barracks or offices. So that was how Robespierre started changing the French society. Their old tradition of calling monsieur or madame, they were changed into citoyen and citoyenne, and even the churches, they were all shut down and started converting it to military barracks or offices. Everything he started changing. Now, Robespierre pursued his policy Robespierre pursued his ideas of ruling the country and changing the French society so deeply, so intensely, that even his supporters began to demand moderation, means to cool down, because it was too extreme. He started becoming an extremist. That means finally he was convicted by a court on July 19, 1974, arrested, and on the next day he was sent to the guillotine. That was how the reign of terror came to an end. So now the Directory rules France. We are coming to page number 17 now of history. The fall of the Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle class to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-property sections of the society. So the new wealthier middle classes, they started taking over the power once Robespierre was guillotined, and they started introducing a new constitution in which they denied vote to the non-property sections of the society, that means the poor sections of the society. So it provided two elected legislative council in which the appointed directory and the executive member were 5 members. In the directory, there were 5 members. That means this was meant to safeguard against the concentration of power in one-man executive as under the Jacobins. Like in the Jacobins, the power was in the hand of one man. That is Robespierre. So he started ruling like a dictator. He became an extremist. So in order to avoid this, they have 5 members in the directory. So in order to cancel this, they have 5 members in the directory so that decision making should not be in the hands of one person. So however, the director clashed with the Legislative Council, who then sought to dismiss them. The Legislative Council, they were not listening to the director, and the directories also, they also were not ready to do what the Legislative Council says. And therefore, the Legislative Council often dismissed them. They packed them off. The political instability of the directory paved the way for the rise of a military dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. So due to these confusions, due to this problem, due to this infighting between the two ruling, the Legislative Council, Legislative and Directory. And Directory. So in this confusion, they had given a chance to Napoleon Bonaparte. So through all these changes in the form of the government, the ideas of freedom, equality before the law, and fraternity remains inspiring, which motivated the political movement in France and the rest of Europe. So even though all these things, this infighting was going on, in this Napoleon came in, Napoleon entered, and he has taken over the power, but still the ideas of freedom, liberty, and fraternity were all remaining out there. Means it was in the mind of the people of France. Liberty, fraternity, and equality. This was there, even though the infighting were there, even though Napoleon started moving in to take over the power. Next is, did the women have revolution in France? From the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought about so many important changes in the French society. They hoped that their involvement would pressurize the revolutionary government to improve measures of their lives. Most women of the third estate had to work for a living. They had to work for a living. They worked as a seamstress or the laundress. They sold flowers, fruits, vegetables, or as a domestic servants in the houses of these people. And most of the women did not have access to education like the reserve members, or the women of the reserve members like them. They don't have. Education was restricted only for the daughters of the noblemen or the wealthier members of the third estate. But still then, even then also, after they completed their studies, their parents used to marry them off. Working women again have to care for their families. They cook, fetch water, queue up for bread, and look after the children. And their wages were lower than those of the men. So look at this pitiable condition for the women. In order to discuss and voice their interests, women even started their own political clubs and newspaper. About 60 women's clubs started coming up in the whole of France and in the French cities. The Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women were the most famous of them. The main demand of these political clubs of the French women were the demand for the same political rights as men. Women were disappointed with the Constitution of 1791, because in the Constitution of 1791, women were left as only the passive citizen. So they started demanding their right to give vote like men, to be elected to the assembly, and to hold political office. Only then they felt would their interests be represented in the new government. So this discrimination between male and female in the French society was opposed by the women. So in order to do that, they started forming their own political clubs, and they started demanding their rights to give vote and to hold political office. In the early years, the revolutionary government did introduce some law that helped the lives of the women. Together with the creation of the state school, schooling were made compulsory for all the girls. At present, we will be surprised that girls are not going to the school, because the majority of the girls started going to the school. And so it was a time when females were treated as second-class citizens amongst the men. So now, their father, once this law was formed, girls were allowed to go to the school to get education, to be educated, and then their fathers also cannot force them to marry against their will. Divorce was made legal. Women can ask for divorce and could be applied for by both the women and male. Both women and male can ask for divorce if they are not happy with their marriage. Women could now also can be trained for jobs, could become artists, or run small business, like what we are having now. So they started giving them the rights. But then the struggle for the women to bring about political equality and political rights, however, continued during the Reign of Terror. It was a continuous fight, continuous demand by the women. So the new government issued laws ordering closures of women's clubs and banning their political activities. Many prominent women were arrested and a number of them were executed. That was during the reign of terror because the women were demanding their rights, forming their own political clubs. Women's movement for voting rights and equal wages continued for the next 200 years in many countries of the world. The fight for the vote was carried out through an international suffrage movement during the late 19th and the 20th centuries. The examples of the political activities of the French women during the revolutionary years was kept alive in an inspiring memory. And finally, in 1946, the women in France have got the right to vote. So that was how this brought about changes in the French society. That was how people started learning. Even if a leader can be very, very popular, but still he can become a tyrant, like Robespierre, who started believing in his theory, in his ideology. So that is what the world is all about. That is what we are learning from history. So much for today.